everybody can log on and before I start chewing away. I should make a point of thanking the New York State Council of New York State Council on the Arts for their general operating support, which helps to pay for these programs, as well as our series sponsor this year was Putnam Market, and we were thrilled to have their support this year. So they supported our summer and autumn strolls and our educational programs this year. So thank you to Putnam Market. It is Giving Tuesday. So everybody who donated made a suggested donation to this program. We appreciate that as part of our Giving Tuesday campaign, and anybody who is here because they donated to one of our many board members or myself or Nicole's fundraisers. We appreciate your support. We've had I think a really tremendous response, overwhelming. So thank you to everybody for your support. If you are joining us on Facebook Live and you want to make a donation, you can do that easily by, I don't know what Nicole is going to tell me. I should say that's go to our website at saratogapreservation.org. Oh, we didn't think about unplugging our telephones. Hold on. All right. Well, it is 7:02, and we think we have a good group who has started, who's logged on. So I'm just going to get started. All right. Thank you again for everybody who's joining us tonight. I'm Samantha Boshart, the Executive Director of the Saratoga Springs Preservation Foundation. I've had the honor of being in this role for over 13 years, and I still enjoy it, so that's good. The foundation was founded in 1977 to promote the preservation and enhancement of the architectural and cultural landscape heritage of Saratoga Springs. We do this through educational programs like tonight, or our summer strolls or our autumn strolls, as well as providing owners of historic buildings with technical assistance, advocating for best preservation practices within the city. We comment on exterior changes, new construction, and for example, the proposed project at 269 Broadway. This is an earlier rendering. This is going to be proposed next to the Saratoga Catholic School, High School, and it will be before the Design Review Commission next week. It's a rather large structure. Unfortunately, we were not able, due to the city's website having issues, not able to provide you with the most recent rendering. But if anybody has concerns about the mass and scale of this building, please just visit our website or contact us and we can give you more information. Or you can also submit a public comment to the Design Review Commission. And again, we can provide you with access to how to do that. We also, in addition to advocacy, we undertake restoration projects. Oops, well, back to advocacy. Nicole's operating the slides, so I apologize. We comment at the Saratoga Racecourse on all of their capital improvement projects. We advocate for endangered buildings. We are working right now on ensuring the long-term preservation of the Smiley Bracket Cottage that you see here below. So stay tuned for that. And we are also doing, we do Russian projects, like we have done the Spirit of Life in the First Baptist Church. And for those of you who may not be aware or tuning in from somewhere other than Saratoga, we recently bought 65 Philo Street, which was a building that was on our endangered list from 1998. And we are thrilled to have purchased this building that was built in 1851 by Alexander Patterson, who actually was an architect and builder, and actually owned a spring on Philo Street. And the Patterson family lived in this home for 90 years and then served as a rooming house for the Jewish community. And so for us, we really wanted tonight's program to sort of highlight this neighborhood, that as it's known, and Amy and Carol and Craig will talk more about this neighborhood and that history. But we thought it was a great opportunity to highlight that what this building may not look like much, but it represents a lot. And so we're really excited about this project. So again, any donations that we receive help us to underwrite all of our missions, whether that be educational programs, our restoration, our advocacy efforts, our ways to assist building owners. So anyway, enough about us. We appreciate your donations of any size throughout the year, but we are particularly grateful for the donations that we've received as part of Giving Tuesday. I would like to remind you that we are a membership-based organization. And so if you're not a member, I hope you will consider joining us. And then let's see, and Nicole will share a link about that because she's our membership and programs director. Which I want to just say, if you're on Facebook, you can go to our donate button and you can make a donation there. I hope all of you will enjoy this program. I want to bring you some business items before I turn it over to our amazing presenters. If you're joining us on Zoom and have any questions, you can use the chat feature, which is located at the bottom of your screen. You may need to move your mouse or tap your screen to see the chat option. If you're joining us over Facebook Live, give us a like and let us know where you're tuning in from. It's always good to see how far our reach is. Nicole will also be checking for questions on Facebook, but we will save all general questions until the end of the presentation. I am so excited about this presentation. Always excited for Carol's presentations. I always learn something new, and she really gives the personality or the people. And I think that's really her passion, is telling stories about the people of our community and made an impact on our community. And I think preserved buildings help to tell those stories, because when those buildings are lost, sometimes those stories are lost as well. So I'm so glad that Carol is with us tonight, and I'm sure I'm going to learn even more from Amy and Craig. And let me just give you a brief introduction. Carol Godette was born and raised in Saratoga Springs. She and her husband live on Nelson Avenue in her childhood home, where they raised their 2 children. Carol taught 5th grade for 31 years at both Greenfield Elementary and Lake Avenue School. She is co-owner of the local Ben & Jerry's franchise, and for the past 4 years has been writing for Simply Saratoga magazine about various Saratoga Springs mom and pop businesses. Amy Godin is an independent scholar who has researched, written, and lectured about Saratoga's early Jewish community. She will share stories about the neighborhood called the Gut, its vibrant food culture and enduring meaning for the city. She is the curator of We Were All Like a Family, an exhibit on Jewish Saratoga at the Saratoga Springs History Museum. With the late Marie Morrison, organized the installation of the historic marker, The Gut, at the corner of Putnam and Philo Streets. She is a longtime contributor to Adirondack Life and is an author of The Black Woods, which is forthcoming from Cornell in 2023. Craig Wilson is making a special guest appearance, is a former features editor for the Saratogian. We'll share a brief selection from his Souvenirs column written during the late 70s and early 1980s. Craig went to USA Today in 1984, where he became a roving feature writer, reporting from across America. He wrote a weekly column every Wednesday called The Final Word. Random House compiled some of his columns and published It's the little things, an appreciation of life's simple pleasures, which is available on Amazon. We are thrilled to have all three of these presenters with us tonight, and I will turn it over to Carol, who will lead us on our program. Thank you.
Hi, I'm so thrilled to have all of you here. And as I'm looking over the list, it's impressive, from Chicago to Maine to Florida. I'm really excited that you're here to listen. And I'm really excited to have Amy, my next door neighbor, who's an expert on this, and Craig Wilson weighing in and helping me along. Whenever I do these programs, I like to have a live audience, and not being able to see your faces, it's really difficult for me. So if I'm not at my very best, it's probably because I can't see your faces that give me energy. I'd like to start with this photo, and it's one of my favorites. Okay, I'm getting some tech advice here. Okay, I'm doing this in the Preservation Foundation office. So I like to start with this photo. It's a 1941 photo, and I love it. Shows the earthiness of this area. You know, we're used to seeing old photos of Saratoga that show an elegant Broadway with people strolling down and elegant porches, but this is really the heart and soul of Saratoga. And we notice all these businesses. Some of them are no longer, but many of them do remain. Are we able to see this? Okay, I guess we're.
Hi everyone. I'm just doing a little
tech over here. Okay. We got very fancy with having separate computers and separate shares. Are we good? Okay, I hope we're good. I'm seeing a couple chats. So if you're having trouble seeing this photo, please let Nicole know in the chat. So I love this, that it shows the everyday life. And here in the corner, we see probably the most important building of the gut, the Reeves building. When Dave and Marianne Barker, now we know this is Bailey's, but when they bought it and it became Bailey's, they hired Robert Jokey to do a research of the whole area. And Jokey wrote in his research of this building that this property at the corner of Phyla and Putnam was an ideal and a place for a commercial enterprise. And I have to agree. So I know I have a lot of experts here, but I like to kind of get you a little involved, even though I can't see you. So this is a game I love to play with my granddaughter called 3 Truths and a Lie. And I know I have some experts here. I have Marcy Weinstein, who knows a lot about this area. I see that we have Jeff Dershowitz and Terry on, who were the original owners of Ben & Jerry. So I know I have some experts that probably will find this very easy, but I hope I can trick a few people. But those of you who do get it right, if you want to participate, type your answer in the chat box, and there may be some prizes later. Okay, and the truth will be, or the lie will be revealed at the end. So the first one is A. The gut is a geographical term for a low-lying part of the city. B, Mother Goldsmiths was named after Nate Goldsmith's beloved mother, Pearl. C, Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield signed their franchise agreement for the Saratoga store on the back of a napkin. D, Hattie's was originally named Hattie's Chicken Shack. So I'll give you a second. Think it over. And we'll reveal the answer at the end. Okay, if you've ever walked in front of Bailey's, what's now Bailey's, you'll see this wonderful sign. And the person responsible or instrumental in getting this sign, Amy Godin, is going to kind of talk about the history of the gut or the valley. And I'm going to turn it over to Amy right now. So, Amy? Are we getting to Amy?
The host is muting me. I am muted.
We can hear you.
You can hear me. Can you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. I share Carol's regret at not being able to see who's out there. I know I'd see some old friends and familiar faces. It's been a really long time since I've had an occasion to review my old notes on Jewish Saratoga, and I have to thank Carol and the Preservation Foundation for urging me to dive back in. Most of the folks I interviewed for various projects 25 years ago were elderly then, and they're gone. And it's painful in a way, but their memories are so vivid and irreverent. It's been a blast to revisit their remarks, and I'm really happy to have that chance. I'm going to read this because if I don't read it, I'm going to be talking for 3 hours. So you want me to read these so I don't go over my 20 minutes max. And before I start talking about Saratoga's Jewish history regarding food and eating and dining out in and around the neighborhood called the Gut, I want to offer a little context about the cultural seedbed which nourished Saratoga's first eateries and vendors. In Saratoga, as in so many cities with Jewish enclaves, food and eating was a focus of attention for somewhat different reasons than it might have been for, say, the Italians or the Poles or the Irish. For Jews, eating right, eating with care, eating the right things was first and last an expression of religious faith. The Yiddish-speaking, largely unassimilated late 19th century immigrant Jews who came to Saratoga were determined to preserve their faith. They peddled junk and housewares, clothes and produce, because peddling on your own lets you keep the Jewish Sabbath and honor Jewish dietary laws, which were ancient, complicated, and demanding. On your own, though, by yourself, with just your backpack or your horse for company, you could fulfill your religious obligations. You could say blessings for your food, you could eat kosher food you made yourself, and you could get home in time to light the candles by Friday dusk. You were the master of your work week. In a factory, an iron mine, a logging camp, your accent and your strange prayers and your aversion to pork and bacon and working on a Saturday would have roused derision and amusement. But on the road, your only society, some farmers and their wives, anti-Semitism was no great threat. And very soon, you had been assured if you worked hard enough, you could trade your peddler's wagon for a storefront with rooms above for family and maybe other people too, like city Jews who came to Saratoga for the healing waters and the bathhouses and homes with kosher kitchens. Fix up a downstairs room with chairs and tables. Make sure your eager renters would be met each morning with tables set not only with warm rolls, but a jug of mineral water fresh drawn just hours earlier from Hawthorne Spring. You had yourself the start of a dining room. Put money down on a bigger place, maybe with the help, excuse me, I lost my place. Maybe with the help of one of Saratoga's immigrant-founded low-interest mutual aid associations. Jewish Saratogians had 3 of these. You were a hotel man with a restaurant, and not just for guests of your own, but from other Jewish hotels and non-Jews too, who might have heard about your wife or mother's braised brisket and potato pancakes with fresh sour cream. Not all or even most of these Jewish hotels with dining rooms advertised themselves as public restaurants, but they were the first to generate an enthusiasm and an expectation of good Jewish food in Saratoga. And in this sense, they paved the way for the next generation of Jewish dineries in the neighborhood we call the Gut and beyond, like Mother Goldsmiths, which you'll hear more about from Carol. Most of the better, more ambitious of these Jewish hotels were not in the gut itself. They made for higher, drier, less congested, elm-lined neighborhoods along Circular, like the Roed or the Lafayette, or on South Broadway, when it was still bracketed with shade trees and clapboard homes, or on Maple near the Muzon House before urban renewal laid that low extension of the gut to waste. But the gut was closely allied to the wider spread of Jewish inns and boarding houses around. It was the city's secondary business district, the part of town you went to get things fixed. Its artisans and butchers, fresh markets and fish stores kept the hotels in and around it in rich supply, and the shopkeepers of the gut, in turn, looked to this wider clientele to buy the kosher capons, the fresh carp, the Yiddish language newspapers that carried full-page ads for Saratoga's many Jewish hotels and kept Brooklynites up to speed on what was going on in the city. Jake Ason's New York Fish and Vegetable Market at 62 Putnam carried the kind of fish Jews knew and liked: halibut, haddock, whitefish, sable, carp, always with fins and scales in accordance with Jewish law. Joe Kovkin's Deli prepared its hot pastrami New York style, hand cut on the bias. Epis Drinken, Epis Essen, Joe's Kosher Delicatessen, said the sign in the window. Zucker's, or maybe Herzog's markets, both of these in the gut, might have bought their koshered fowl from Berkowitz's farm in Greenwich, or the Catcher's Chicken Farm on Gick Road, which was also a hotel, or the Scops Farm out on Crescent, or the Polachek's farm in Rock City Falls. Immigrants craving old-style Hungarian stuffed cabbage or heavy-duty noodle kugel could tuck into a plate at Honig's restaurant on Putnam. Also on Putnam, the Sanitary restaurant, which specialized in kosher dairy, blintzes, pitchers of buttermilk, and the like. Several Jewish hotels with dining rooms of note also pepped up their offerings with dinner music from small orchestras or a little Yiddish theater, a comic act, maybe a magic lantern show about Jewish settlements in Palestine. The Hotel Woodbridge featured one Chief White Cloud who played a sax and sang the Isle of Capri in Yiddish. And in summers, the Woodbridge, like the Brenner, like the Empire hotels, had its own house rabbi too. When I was interviewing older Saratogians for my exhibit at the History Museum on the interplay between Jewish Saratogians and the city Jews who patronized their rooming houses, boarding houses, and hotels every summer from roughly 1910 or 20 to 1960, some for the horses, but many, many more for the pleasure of a long soak in a fizzy tub, a deep sip of mineral water, and a chance to sit and stroll and rest. I asked Mel Weisskopf, whose parents owned the Lafayette, what it was like for him, the kid with asthma, growing up at the high end of the gut in a house that was also a hotel. What did he do all day while his folks were working? Weisskopf guffawed. I was a bellhop. I was a short order cook in the morning. I helped with bookkeeping. I was maitre d'. At lunchtime, I'd take dinner orders, chicken or beef, no menus ever. My mother made all her own challah, bagels, rolls, pickled her pickles and herring, made her own corned beef, kugel, and mushroom barley soup. I also spoke with the late Aaron Brenner, whose father, a rabbi, operated the Hotel Brenner on Broadway for a stretch. This was a bigger operation, which owns the distinction of being, with the Adelphi, one of the few early Saratoga hotels still in operation, now called the Inn at Saratoga, and still as ever family run. The inn may be as renowned for its Sunday brunch as its predecessor was admired for its strictly kosher kitchen, in-house services, and weekly Torah study. Brenner's parents got many of their chambermaids and busboys through a New York City labor agency. Other hotels, like the Grossenbaum, hauled its stuff up every summer from other hotels they ran elsewhere. In their case, I think it might have been the Jersey Shore. The Grossenbaum was on South Broadway, where the Holiday Inn is now, and owed its sterling reputation to a sophisticated wine cellar, a grape arbor and flower garden, an in-house dinner band, and Yiddish theater productions. But the chief reason it really should be canonized in Saratoga memory, in my view, is because it was the training ground for one Joe Baum, who would eventually distinguish himself as the most prominent and influential restaurateur in New York City and arguably the nation. Maybe some older listeners in this group dined in one of Baum's legendary restaurants in New York, the Four Seasons, the Rainbow Room, Mama Leone, Windows on the World, the Tavern on the Green. The Saratoga native Joe Baum, sometimes called the Cecil B. DeMille of American restaurateurs, was the first to dream up restaurants that worked the theme, like Polynesia or Royal Spain or Imperial Rome. Baum also argued before anyone for the greatness of American, not continental cuisine. And he was the first to recognize the allure of a celebrity chef. But for all his great fame, he never lost sight of his Saratoga roots. In the 90s, he rented the Rolling Stones Rolling Thunder tour bus to haul his family up to Saratoga and schlep them all around to the old remaining haunts, from the track to the spa to what was left of the gut itself. Everything important I know about hospitality I learned in the old hotel, he told me. And like Mel Weisskopf of the Lafayette, Baum too was pressed into daily service as a boy, even raising baby carrots for the chef. The Hotel Weinstein on South Broadway was also known and loved for its home cooking. The owner, Israel Weinstein, had a hotel back in Kupil, Russia. In Saratoga, his long-lived inn boasted 40 rooms and a dining room that seated 100. That was the draw, Jack Weinstein told me. My mother made a strudel, not apple. This was dried fruit and nuts, cream cheese pastries, blintzes, pretzels, onion rolls, baked herring, veal cutlets, and all of this for $24 a week, room and board, and that was top dollar. Even when he was a student at RPI, Jack Weinstein came home weekends to bus tables and squeeze orange juice for his family's guests. Weinstein, like all the grown children of Saratoga innkeepers, home cooks I spoke with, looked back on his childhood immersion in the hotel scene with awe, amusement, and resignation. But not every innkeeper's child got with the program. In 1927, Alex Mazur, just 15, whose parents owned Mazur's Hotel and Restaurant on Phyla, feeling, quote, this is from the Saratogian, irked by the necessity of manual life of the Phyla Street Hotel and possessed of a desire to become a motion picture star, dressed up in his best clothes and just took off. Still missing after half a year, his distraught parents finally put a notice about him in the newspaper. When or how he got back home, I cannot tell you, but by 1933, we find him back on Phyla, again at the hotel, working and importuning city fathers to please deal with the chicken butcher crisis. Their little shops were so unregulated that their operations were stinking up the neighborhood and attracting vermin, he complained. Alex Mazur never made it big in Hollywood, but I imagine many hotels in the neighborhood regarded him as a leading man all the same. After his complaints, the city finally made the Shockettes, the ritual chicken slaughters, get metal barrels with metal lids, and inspections became more codified and routine. Another incident that provoked a police investigation in the gut was much more serious and not as readily resolved. Squarely between Good Friday and Easter in March 1940, vandals entered Phyla Street with orange paint and rocks. Phyla Street, for all our emphases tonight, was at no point wholly or even predominantly Jewish, but since only the homes and businesses of Jewish Saratogians were targeted by these boys or men, I think it's fair to say this night of broken glass was a hate crime, first and last. Homes where windows were broken, window boxes overturned, and paint smeared on porches belonged to Joseph Schultz, a rabbi, Isaac Wolf, a boarding house operator, Dr. Moses Weiss, a banologist from Carlsbad who treated immigrant spa goers and cure seekers, the owners of the Hillside Inn, a Jewish boarding house, and Israel Mazur, the innkeeper. Nobody was injured. Only property was attacked, but these homes belonged to immigrants who had left the old country in an age of murderous pogroms. And we can imagine how this assault challenged their fragile feelings of security. Were the perpetrators ever caught? I've seen nothing in the paper that suggests this, but neither was the vandalism repeated, at least never on this multi-household scale. On a happier note, Jews in the gut, both Saratogians and summer people, could find a model for resistance to bullies, thugs, and vandals in a beloved summer visitor to Saratoga, Joseph Greenstein, aka the Mighty Atom, a health nut of prodigious strength who, for several weeks for many years in the summers, set up a pop-up business in the empty lot where Ben & Jerry's is today. You'll see a picture of him in Carol's slides. From the Bronx, Greenstein was a legend among bodybuilders. His hair, as thick and tightly coiled as the man himself, was long enough to suggest a rope. And with this human rope, he used to pull a good-sized automobile down Putnam. This stunt was meant to advertise the power of his homemade hair tonic. Buy a bottle, he urged his fans, and maybe you can pull a car as well. The Mighty Atom brought a touch of P.T. Barnum to the hood, and why not? The restorative claims of the Springs were hardly less exaggerated. This was a neighborhood whose vibrancy and vigor had long drawn on the faith of immigrants, whether faith concerned religious law, the healing genius of the spa, the promise of a crap game, or the curative powers of chicken soup. Today, the ethnic stamp on the old gut is gone. With the passing of the immigrants and their assimilated children, Yiddish no longer rings out from the stoops and porches along Lafayette and Caroline and Phyla and Putnam. Iris Weiss, a doctor's daughter, told me that as a girl, she often took the alley behind Phyla just to avoid having always to kibitz with the old folks calling out from every clapboard house. But walk her old neighborhood today and nobody would say a peep. Nothing you can see reveals the half or suggests the half-century residency of a once cohesive ethnic community. Gone are the mikvahs behind the one-time rooming houses of the Hasidim, and all the hotels with distinctly Jewish names, Feller, Farrer, Weinstein, Mazur, Brenner, Finkel, Bodner, Gross, Waldman are out of business too. Gone too are all the inns with names that revealed nothing of their Jewish patronage or culture, like the Columbian, Victoria, Adelphi, Geyser, Empire, Woodland, Plaza, and Park. Demolished or absorbed into private homes, those hardworking dining rooms once drew not just spa worshipers from Brooklyn, the Bronx, and the Lower East Side, but wedding parties from Glens Falls, conventioneers from Gloversville, and Jews from Saratoga too, especially after the season for break fasts during the high holy days. A lot of the hotels that were slightly more upper crust continued right into the late fall to accommodate families that really were tired of cooking, wanted to get out of their own boarding houses and have someone else cook for them, and went to some of the more fancy hotels for a good Rosh Hashanah breakfast dinner, for instance. Those hotel kitchens and the markets that supplied them, and the peddlers, Jewish, Italian, Polish, who supplied the markets, are almost wholly missing from living memory today. Long chunks of inner-city brick and mortar fell to urban renewal, buildings which today would almost certainly rouse the interest of historic preservationists. And memory is weak about this community. Exhibitions which have celebrated this nook of Saratoga's history have occasionally been organized. The late great oral historian Sophie Goldstein curated one of these, the very first. The late Sam Siegel and Sue Edwards and myself developed others. But when exhibits end, the story's over. The Saratoga Room in the library has scores of books on the history of Saratoga Springs, especially the track, but very Only very recently did one of these acknowledge and explore the history of Jewish Saratoga and the role of the neighborhood called the Gut. We have a good sign on a street corner, which was not mine alone. To this we owe Marie Morrison, the late Marie Morrison, for the impetus to get this going on and get this up. But how much really can one sign say? And boy, we tried to pack it in. Hold on now. What's needed, I feel, is a more tangible, sustained expression of our commitment to the past and its lost stories. And that's exactly what we have with the Saratoga Preservation Foundation's decision to buy and restore a modest, down at the heels, one-time boarding house on Phyla. This most inspired purchase reminds us, and in photogenic Saratoga, we need to be reminded that you don't have to be manorial and fancy to count as meaningfully historical. Great stories and local heroes flourished in plain Jane homes as well as grand. We'll never know the names of all the tenants and owners who flowed in and out of this old house that preservation bought, but we do know that by the 1920s, this house and others like it in the Gut belonged to an emerging, ethnically diverse and quite distinctive neighborhood. We know that as much as the saving of this house salutes the antebellum architect who designed it and lived in it in 1851, it also honors a 20th century community, a little world inside the greater world of Saratoga that surely did as much for the city as the city did for it. When a house was built, who built it, how we name its style, these are useful ways to know a place, but there are so many more. There is how a place was used, enjoyed, looked forward to, and held in memory. How the bread smelled when it came out of the oven there. How the mahjong tiles sounded when they smacked down on the table on the porch. How the petunias erupted from the window boxes. Saving 65 Phyla honors not just a building, but the culture that made a house like this a destination, made it a place to anticipate and save up for, a place to call home 3 blessed weeks of the year. And here I want to pass the baton back to Carol, who will introduce us to more recent episodes in the Gut's long story and bring to her remarks, as much as I wish I could, but I can't, the insight of a homegrown Saratoga native. So please keep an eye out for the mighty Adam in his car, because he will show up. Thank you. Can't hear.
All right, here I am. Thank you, Amy. I learned so much from that. So I'm going to start. I like to talk, as Samantha said at the beginning, about the people. And when I do research, I always find out that it raises more questions than I ever had thought of when I'm doing the research. So I started with Tannenbaums because when I went to Dr. Arthur Ostroff, he would talk about it all the time. And sometimes I would try to divert away from talking about my health problems, and I would ask him about his life. And Tannenbaums was clear in his mind. He went to the Jewish Hebrew school that is now where Death Wish Coffee is. And he said the only thing that made it palatable was that on his way home to his home on Pinewood Avenue was that he would stop at Tannenbaum's for what he said were the most delicious vanilla shortbread cookies with an apple crumb topping and strawberry across the diagonal. And he loved it so much, he even had his mom get the recipe, but it was just never the same. So that was his memory of Tannenbaum's. And so I said, oh, I need to find out more about this. So as I started doing research, and my neighbor, Mitch Cohen, who's not on tonight, would sometimes help me with the deed search, I saw that the property was owned by Regina Tannenbaum. So the couple that owned it lived downstairs, Regina and Leo Tannenbaum, and they had 3 children, and they lived upstairs, and you can see and the shades where the family lived. And this was a kosher market. And I was very curious as to why, in a time in the 1940s where women didn't own property if they were married, everything was in a man's name, why the deed was in her name. And I was able to track down their son, May, who described growing up in this store. It reminded me, if you've ever read Bridge of Sighs by Richard Russo, one of my favorite books of his. This idyllic childhood of growing up in this market where everyone knew you and you knew everyone. And she didn't explain too much about that. But later on, after I wrote this story, I was able, actually, their son, Leo Tannenbaum, read the story and called the magazine and got in touch with me. He's a real character. He lives now in Florida, but he's a Wall Street lawyer. And he can spin a yarn. But he told me about how his parents had the classic immigrant story. They met when they were 5 years old in Russia. And they decided as teenagers to immigrate to the United States. She came with her family legally through Ellis Island. He came with his family through Cuba and somehow navigated the waters from Cuba and entered illegally. So he was never a legal citizen, so he couldn't own property. So everything was in her name. They started off in New York City, but with the labor laws and with unions, they found it hard to compete. And she was from Saratoga. So they decided to move here and they opened this market. And I know, Amy, you mentioned Susan Edwards. I know she described when I spoke to her this as just an assault to the senses. And I can almost smell some of those fruits on the sidewalk. And I want you to notice the sign over to the right of this photo. And you see a man sitting on a bench. We're going to come back to that later. That's still part of Tannenbaum's, but you can notice from the sign that it wasn't Tannenbaum's. So we'll talk about that later because it was so central, it spilled out into the rest of the neighborhood. So who shopped there? Well, it wasn't just the Jewish population. Minnie Bolster, many of you know her, she talked about going there with her mom. But one of their most well-known customers, for some of you movie fans, was Monty Woolley. Monty Woolley, for those of you who don't know who he was an actor known for his movie, The Man Who Came to Dinner, starring Bette Davis. And he summered in Saratoga and actually lived here quite a bit of time. He bought a house eventually here and ended up dying and is buried in Greenwich Cemetery. For those, this is a little aside, but just to let you know how important he was in life, for those of you who don't know him. When he died in 1963 and had his funeral at Bethesda, and I know we have Dennis Wilson on board here, he had a star-studded pallbearer list. It was Cole Porter, who was his friend in Yale and remained close with him his entire life. It was Thornton Wilder, who had been a student of his when he did some teaching as well with acting. It was local Frank Sullivan. So I would have loved to have been at Bethesda for that funeral, but he was very well known and he went in there all the time. And although you see him smoking in this photo, he actually convinced Mr. Tannenbaum that he had to stop smoking, said his daughter May. So he was a very influential and well-known customer, went there regularly. And this is a time when we didn't have a Starbucks. So if you wanted to find out the daily news, as often in many of these neighborhood markets, everybody kind of went there to see what was going on and find out the day's happenings. Tannenbaum's also spilled over, and as Amy set me up so nicely for this, here's a photo. This isn't actually from Saratoga, because this happened other places as well, of the mighty Adam pulling a car with his hair, with a beard. But he did this on the corner. The Tannenbaums would let him set up shop and sell his hair tonic. And we can also see these temporary, this was just in the summer, these greenwood fruit stands that were set up and they sold fruit. So every morning, Jay Tannenbaum, as a teenager, drove with his dad down to Manans, and that's where they bought fruit. They left Saratoga at 4 a.m. every morning. They went and they got the freshest and finest fruit they could find, and they would sell it on the corner. So they spilled over because they were so popular that they didn't just contain their building or their business to that corner. They spilled over, and that's where the mighty Adam. There's even a movie, if you ever, sometimes I get down the rabbit hole and I start doing research, and then I get off track, and I haven't watched that movie yet, but someday I'm going to. So here we see, this is an interesting thing, and this kind of, although the topic is a taste of the gut, we kind of say, okay, it was a food place across the street. Why did it become a gas station? Well, as we look at this deed, we can see, and you can see it highlighted in yellow, there was a no compete clause. So Regina Tannenbaum decided that she didn't need that property, the Tannenbaum, so they decided to sell it. And when they sold it, they didn't want to have another market there competing against them. So they had a no compete that for 15 years, there couldn't be any grocery store or food produce sold on that corner. So instead, it was purchased by Congress Gas and Oil. And you can see, here's a picture. Originally, it was an Esso station, and you'll see that down in the corner. This is probably my favorite Lucy Kettlewell painting. For those of you who know Lucy Kettlewell, she loved to paint the gut. And according to her daughter, Chloe, her favorite symbol was that flying A. And you see the flying A there depicted. When it was a gas station. And then above that is Jerry Rose, who ran when it became a mobile station. And you also can see when, and Amy kind of talked about this, before urban renewal came along and fixed the water problem, you could see on a typical rainstorm that it would get flooded. So it didn't stay a gas station after that 15 years ended. And I've got some real experts, but before I talk a little bit about Ben and Jerry's, I think Craig has disappeared. We're going to turn this over. So Craig Wilton wrote many, many columns. He was prolific in his years at the Saratogian, and he wrote profiles on people. And when we talk about Hattie's, he wrote one on Hattie, but he also wrote about daily life experiences. And I came across this collection at the Saratoga room. And when I read the one on Ben and Jerry's, I said, okay, Craig, you have to kick this off. So I'm going to turn this over to Craig right now, and he's going to share that column with us.
Oh, Craig, if you could just unmute, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Is that better?
Perfect.
Okay, all right.
Oh, Craig, we lost you again. Hold on. I think you're good.
Am I okay now?
Great, thank you.
Okay, I'm not going to take this personally that I'm being muted. Anyway, I have a painting of Lucy Kettlewell's, and I think it is in the gut. I just went to try to, I thought it was in the back bedroom, but it's not there. But there is a painting of hers, of a clothesline that kind of goes across Phyla Street. But anyway, I wrote a column about Ben and Jerry's, and I was told that it's in 1984, which is when I left Saratoga. So it might have been one of my last columns, but let me read it to you here. I was sitting across from a woman at lunch the other day when she came out with the not too startling news that eating is a social event in America. She said she tried to diet a few times, but gave up because she lost all her friends during these periods of fasting. They didn't call me anymore, and then I realized I only saw them when I was eating. We'd go to lunch, we'd go to brunch, we'd be at a dinner party together. But when they heard that I was on a diet, I got cut off the list. She's back on the list now, evidenced the other day by her plate of pasta salad. She was plump, happy, and surrounded by friends. August in Saratoga is not a time for fasting. It is a time for indulgence. It's like the Christmas season. After a while, you just give up and eat, knowing full well that the round of social events and groaning buffet tables will be gone with the last race. It's not that some of us don't try. I've turned away from more food this month than I've turned away from all year. But then again, I've also eaten more this month than I did all last year. It seems as if there's a temptation at every corner. One of the newest to hit town is Ben & Jerry's ice cream stand on Phyla Street. I'm not sure what I did before Ben & Jerry's moved to town. I think I just went to bed. Now, every night at 10, I find myself walking down Phyla Street, the bright lights of Ben & Jerry's luring me down the hill and inside the screen door. And there I stand, defenseless, staring up at the seemingly endless list of exotic ice creams: brownie sundae, Oreo mint, Heath bar crunch, vanilla with M&Ms. The list goes on. It's not that I haven't tried to resist. A friend wanted me to make the 10 p.m. pilgrimage Tuesday night. I said I'd walk down with him, but would have no ice cream. Another friend said she'd like to join along for the walk, but again, no ice cream. When we arrived, the two of us sat outside while the third went in for his treat. Everything was going fine until the friend came back out with his ice cream and a dish of raspberry ice for the two of us. He insisted, threatening to drop us as friends if we stared at it any longer. It was then I came to the realization that it's mostly wrong, morally wrong, to go to an ice cream stand and not eat ice cream. It's like leaning up against a bar without a drink. You can play with the napkins only so long. So that's it.
Thank you, Craig. That was great. What a wonderful memory. So I should have, had I known that Terry and Jeff were going to be on, have them talk about this next part about how it started as a Ben & Jerry's, because I wasn't there at that part. But Jeff Dershowitz was a childhood friend of Ben and Jerry, and they had opened, Ben & Jerry had opened their original ice cream store in an old converted gas station in Burlington, Vermont. And so the fourth ever Ben & Jerry's franchise was opened here in Saratoga, owned by Jeff. And it was actually the franchise agreement, legend has it, and probably we should unmute them and they could tell us more, on the back of a napkin. That's how informal things were at that time. Now it's very different. And also we have had to replace them a few times, but the iconic swing that everybody comes to Ben & Jerry's for, the ice cream and the swing, was built by Jeff and either Ben or Jerry or both of them. I'd have to, maybe they could type in the chat which one it was. One of my favorite stories in my time of having Ben & Jerry's happened on an April Fool's Day. Jerry's son was looking at Skidmore and he decided to make a visit to Saratoga. He let us know. And I said to the kids who were working, I said, when Jerry gets there, let me know and I'll pop down. So I walked in and there was Jerry. He thought it would be really fun to kind of hop behind the counter and scoop. And there were some customers there and he hopped behind. And as I walked in, and he was giving them their ice cream and saying, okay, yeah, I'm Jerry, you know, the Jerry. And they're like, sure you are. And they thought it was an April Fool's joke. So as I walked in the door, Jerry looked at me. He said, Carol, tell him I'm really Jerry. And I said, yeah, that's really Jerry. Well, they thought it was just part of the stick and, you know, shtick, and they just didn't believe us. So kind of discouraged and dejected, Jerry looked at me, he goes, well, you want to come up on Broadway and find Tyrone with me? I think he's done with his tour now. And so we left the store and he was kind of crestfallen. And so I came back a little bit later and the customers were still there eating their ice cream. And they kind of looked at me and go, that really was Jerry, wasn't it? And I said, yeah. And they said, we were convinced it was a great April Fool's joke. So to my knowledge, that's the last time he hopped behind the counter at our store and scooped. But occasionally they do make an appearance and they love Saratoga and they love this area. And we love having them there. I'm gonna walk across the street now to another legendary place in the gut. And although it wasn't owned by Jewish people, Hattie's was beloved. And it's one of the few places that, when Amy was saying all of this is gone, that has remained there and true to the mission of what Hattie was all about. Hattie was the most generous, community-minded person that I can think of in my lifetime. And she opened her restaurant. Originally, it had been on Federal Street. And when urban renewal came along in 1968, her restaurant had to be moved. And so she moved to this location, 45 Phyla, and it was called Hattie's Chicken Shack. So if you remember that little trivia, three truths and a lie, you might know the answer that was true. It was Hattie's Chicken Shack originally. And Hattie was really known for her New Orleans cooking. It was unpretentious. And Craig, if we could unmute you, I know, can we unmute him, Nicole? I know you went there on a regular basis with my parents and have way more stories about it than I do. Mr. Austin kind of shuffling along. Craig?
Yes, I mean, it was our rainbow room. We just went to Hattie's and it was just wonderful. You might remember Father Winslow from Bethesda. He used to go there all the time. And I think Hattie actually went to Bethesda with your dad, Carol, at the early morning service. But it was one of those places. I mean, the chicken, I just can't tell you how oddly special it was. All of my memories of Hattie's are just wonderful. And I think she also posted some of my columns on her wall. Sometimes she would just put up newspaper stories and columns, which of course made it a much better place with my columns on the wall. So anyway.
Yes. Yeah, she was. When my father passed away, she was heartbroken and she came early to the wake because she had to open the restaurant, and we let her sit alone with him in the funeral home, and it was very moving hearing her praying to the Lord to take care of him, and you could see how deeply moved she was by it. And she then cooked a tremendous amount of food and brought it to our family, hams. I mean, it was just like, I think she took half the restaurant that day and brought it to our house to feed us. But that's just the kind of person she was.
Do you know how she ended up in Saratoga?
A little bit, but maybe you could tell me more.
Oh, I don't know. That's why.
Oh, okay. Well, she came here. Let's see, in 1938. And they were not really sure when she was born. And she had some other friends. When I did a story on the Spite and Dival. She was friends with the woman who opened the Spite and Dival. So I think that was part of her draw here. As we go to the next slide, we're going to cue in somebody. So here was a photo that was on the wall, and we're going to find out a little bit more about this photo. But you can notice in the background, we don't serve liquor, but we don't have a license to serve wine, but we'll gladly serve your own. But my friend John Greenwood, who was their milkman, was there on the very last day that Hattie's was open. And so John is going to tell us a little bit about, we're going to unmute him, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how he became the owner of this picture. So John, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Okay, John. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on. I delivered to Hattie for 10 years. It was, she was my last stop on a Friday, and the smell of the place, and it was just, and it's funny when Craig talked about Bill, when I would get there, it was a little bit later, and Bill would have his head down on the table, and he would just listen for the screen door to slam, that green screen door, and he'd pop to life. And I just, when Amy talked about, it's sad to see all these things go, but I'm just so grateful that I had a chance to know all these people, Hattie and Nate and Goldsmith, and just all the people that ran the restaurants down there, because I got to deliver to them. But anyway, on Hattie's last day, it was kind of a sad day for everybody that was around there, but she was fine. She was, I think she was tired. And I asked her, Hattie, can I have a piece of something from the wall? Can I have a photograph from the wall? Because like Craig said, she had everything on that wall. She didn't even bat an eye. She said, honey, you take whatever you want from that wall. And this was a photograph. It was had a beautiful little black frame around it, and it just encompassed her and Bill in the restaurant. And I cherish it. And I wrote that little poem on the left there one time when I think they were having some kind of a remembrance or something, but I think maybe it was when Hattie passed. But anyway, just a lot of wonderful memories from the gut and delivering to all those restaurants. And I appreciate you letting me share that memory.
Thank you. So now we're going to move back to Tannenbaum's. This is a blow up of the photo I showed you earlier of somebody sitting on a bench. And this is Nate Goldsmith. Nate Goldsmith started out of the window of Tannenbaum's restaurant. And you can see in the lower corner, Nate with his three brothers. They were Saratogians. Their mother died of TB, their mother and their younger sister. And they were raised by the oldest sister. All brothers were very close together. And many of you maybe remember his brother Lou, who had Lou's Luncheonette. He's pictured there as well. But Nate, he loved show tunes, and he liked to sing as well. And he thought he was going to leave Saratoga and he was going to write Broadway show tunes. So for a while, he lived in the Brill Building in New York City and tried to get these little ditties, these little show tunes published. It didn't really work out for him. So in 1939, when a lot of other people his age were going off to war, he had very poor eyesight. In fact, he was later in life declared legally blind. He always wore thick glasses. He was not eligible to be in the service like his brother Lou. So in Saratoga, he decided to open up a little deli where he mostly made pancakes out of the window of Tannenbaum's store. And his friend Chinny Ferrone said, these pancakes are so good that they're better than my mother's make. And that was his inspiration when he became successful to open a restaurant called Mother Goldsmiths. It was not named after his mother, Pearl, because she had passed away when he was 8 years old. But it was named after what Chinny had said about his pancakes. So he moved down the street to what we know as 43 Phyla, later on, more recently, R&R's. And right now it's getting ready to open as a new place called The District, which we're going to have to kind of tune in. They're painting it as we speak outside. So he decided to open up this restaurant. And one of the things that made it kind of, you could get his New York City influence, was Cy Wallach. He was an artist who had been in Paris in the pre-Hitler days, a street artist sketching, and then he moved to Greenwich Village. And he came to Saratoga, and Cy Wallach sketched patrons, well-known patrons. And here's one of my favorites of Nate. And then you could see the picture of Nate underneath the character. I had to include my favorite, which was Judge Sweeney. And this was Judge Sweeney when he was a lawyer. I know his daughter, Renee, whose mom was our city historian, her dad, Judge Sweeney, always said she loved going into Mother Goldsmiths and sitting in the booth right underneath her father's character, which I believe is still there. Rumor has it they are going to be auctioning these characters off because they're not going to be part of the decor of the new restaurant. And so keep your eyes open for that, because these are really rare. And I think when Amy talked about having a piece of history, these are a piece of Saratoga history. So that was a little bit of it, of the Sardi's feel, the New York City feel. When it first opened, it was rather, it looked more like a luncheonette. It's a breakfast, lunch, and dinner all the time. And then it grew. This is in the pre-Cy Wallach days, this early photo of Mother Goldsmiths. But Mother Goldsmiths was really a family operation. Here you can see Nate's right hand, his wife, Roz, who I just had the best interview when I was writing the story with her about that. And she sadly passed away last spring. You can see in these photos, Roz was his driver because Nate couldn't drive. So if they needed ice, anything they needed, Roz was in that car. And you can see this picture of Roz and Nate on Phyla Street in 1963. Later on, you can see them as a couple down at the bottom before they sold the restaurant. And in the top photo, you see their daughter, Paula, who worked, and I think that what, as a waitress and hostess and whatever else needed to be done, as well as their son, Larry, who also worked in the restaurant. So it was a total family operation. But I think I was talking to my sister Janet about it. I said, what do you remember about Mother Goldsmiths? And she said, oh, going there for brunch and that pastry table. And I think that was a big draw for many, many people. And you can see Paula in front of that pastry table on one Sunday morning. But Nate, I love this next picture of him. He had this impish grin, and he felt that it wasn't a party, it wasn't an event unless there was music. So he used to serenade his customers, and he would sing Broadway show tunes or whatever he came to mind, and it would make customers feel special. All the baked goods were homemade, and you can see here he's about ready to serve some homemade muffins and some rye bread to a customer. And going there was an event. In fact, for Skidmore students, and again, getting back to those pre-coffee shop days, they used to go there from the 40s to the 60s. Skidmore students would go there for lunch, and they would spread out in a booth, and they would do their homework there and hang out there. And Nate was so beloved that at one of the Skidmore graduations, he was awarded an honorary degree at the graduation ceremony by the Skidmore students because he was so beloved. So everyone went there. You didn't need to be Jewish. I know my sister Janet said, well, don't you remember we went there on Christmas Eve, because back then other restaurants weren't open and that being that they were Jewish, they were open on Christmas Eve. And I don't remember that, but she always pointed out the black and white cookies, and I do remember those. It was also a hangout for the racing set. Nate loved horses, and he owned 5 horses. And I think he said he had the honor of saying he never had a horse win, but he also had a horse, Danny Deaver here, that he used to like to ride. And one day his friends decided that Danny needed to come down to Mother Goldsmiths and visit. And you could see Danny visiting at Mother Goldsmiths. And I love this photo because of the signage on it. It's very different than what it looks like today. Another great story was in August, every morning after workouts, the whole racing set, Alfred Vanderbilt, you name it, they all went to Mother Goldsmiths, and they would kind of just kibitz about whatever was going on at the races. But Woody Stevens was a regular there too. And in 1988, when he finally won his first Travers, he had won 5 Belmonts in a row. He walked into Mother Goldsmiths, and the entire restaurant stood up and started chanting, Woody, Woody. And everyone that was there still talks about it today. I wasn't one of those people, but it sounds like a great moment. So Nate lived on. They ended up selling the restaurant, and it later became 43 Phyla, which was a very upscale restaurant, and kept the whole idea of Mother Goldsmiths going as an eatery. Nate also owned another restaurant, the Country Gentleman, which some of you may know as well. So you always felt special when you went to Mother Goldsmith. So because we're running over, I'm going to kind of wrap up now, and let's revisit our 3 truths and a lie. So as we look through, I don't know if Amy told us, but A, that is true. Amy said that that was a geographical term, and when she first decided to put that on a sign, she had a little resistance from people. They thought that gut was a derogatory name, but that is true. But we know now that B is our lie, because Mother Goldsmith was not named after his mother Pearl. Hopefully you remember that the franchise agreement was on the back of a napkin, and that Hattie's was called Hattie's Chicken Shack. So Nicole's going to let me know later who got the correct answers, who got the B's. At this time, whoops, I guess we had another slide there. Where is my other slide, Nicole? I wanted to thank all of our presenters. And really, when you're doing a program like this, there's so many things you have to draw up on. So I was talking to Craig, I was talking to Amy, John was a big help. So many people that it's just not a one-person thing. So for all the people that helped, and all of you for tuning in and hearing a little bit more, I thank you for giving up your evening. I know we had somebody who just literally yesterday got his hip replaced and is probably in a little bit of pain, but he said, I'm tuning in tonight. So Tom Denny, thank you for that, among others. Any questions, Nicole? Do we have anything in the chat?
We sure did. Hold on one second. I will
Okay, and it
pull
might
those
be for
up.
somebody else.
All right. So Josh did say to Craig, could I get a last few words of that article, beginning with how immoral it is to go without ice cream in an ice cream shop? I need that in my journal for posterity. So Craig, you will live on in posterity in his journal. But we will be sharing a recording of this to the email that you registered with, or if you're joining us over on Facebook, you can always email us at Saratoga Preservation Foundation to get a recording for it. But Rick did ask, I heard that the Saratoga location was going to be the first Ben & Jerry's, but for some reason it ended up being in Burlington. Any truth to this?
Yes, there is.
Oh, Carol, you just have to unmute. You have to unmute, sorry.
yes, there is truth to that. And Jeff can probably, and Terry can back me up on this, and they probably know more firsthand. But Ben had a 7 college tour, I believe. Skidmore was one of his colleges on his 7 college tour, and he loved Saratoga. And I do think they were considering making it the first, but Jeff, if you're on and we want to weigh in on this, you could probably give us some more information. Is he there? Jeff or Terry Blasco?
Terry did note that the franchise agreement was not signed on a napkin.
Oh, she did know it was not?
Not.
Okay, I checked with my partner, Patrick, and that's always been the lore at our store. So, okay, I stand corrected. Sorry about that. I'm going to have two answers there that are incorrect. Okay. Terry has a few points. Cheryl Gray asked, what was the location of the library? So the library now is in the gut, but of course it used to be where currently the art center is on Broadway. Any other questions? Oh, someone said, would anybody be able to talk about the executive, which was my late night hangout at Cafe Lena? I cannot address the executive, but that's something I'm going to need to look into because I had heard a lot about the executive. Craig, did you ever go to the executive? Oh, we got to unmute him.
Me too.
No, I went to Cafe Lena 1,000 times, and I even remember half of the times I was there, if you know what I mean. But no, I didn't go to the executive.
Okay. Any other questions I'm missing? Oh, does Craig have any more columns about Saratoga? Would love to read a collection. Well, I'm so glad you asked that, Cindy. So here's my dream, and I've started working on it, and I got in touch with Craig last year. I've written a lot about corner stores, and I'm organizing them. I would like to do it as a benefit for the Preservation Foundation and for the Saratoga History Museum, because they've been so generous in sharing the bolster collection photos. So I'm working on reorganizing the places and kind of the neighborhoods. And I've been doing this column called On This Spot, where I take a location and kind of peel back the layers of time. But you can't really talk about a place unless you talk about the people. And Craig did that firsthand at a great time. So in his collection, he's agreed that, we haven't really talked about this more recently, to let me use some of those columns and kind of co-do a book with me. So that's kind of in the early stages, and we hope to reprint those columns when he wrote about people. And I kind of wanted my ideas to kick it off. He has this amazing article on George Bolster, and I think that kind of sums up. We wouldn't know what we know about Old Saratoga had it not been for George Bolster making that collection. So I think you will be seeing those more to come, but also they are in a binder in the Saratoga room.
Carol, we were talking, remember, about, was her name Ellen at Menges and Curtis?
Ellen Ruley, yes.
And then all the time spent in that booth at Lou's Luncheonette with your dad and Minnie Bolster, and what was Amy the waitress?
Yes, she was. Yes, and you wrote about that, so people can read about that in one of your columns. You wrote a great piece on Lou's.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, I remember as a newspaper man going to Lou's and sitting in that booth with Minnie and Amy. I mean, I learned more. I just went back to the paper and went, okay, let me tell you what's going on in town. And it was often true.
Yeah. So yeah, keep your eyes open for that. And So for those of you who guessed the franchise agreement on a napkin, I guess I should have checked with the original source, Terry, rather than Patrick, who I thought knew a lot of trivia of Ben and Jerry's, because he does. All right.
Carol, I found the Lucy Kettlewell. Can you see it at all?
I do want to see this. Oh my, that is great.
I don't think it's Philo Street, but can you see the clothesline?
I can.
yeah.
For a while, she lived in a farm out, I believe it was in Cambridge. I love her work.
Yeah, me too. It's one of my favorite paintings that I have from Saratoga.
Yeah, and she captured the gut so beautifully.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming, and thanks.
Carol, we actually have 2 more quick questions. Terry's, she said that the franchise agreement wasn't signed on a napkin, but the franchise territory was outlined on a Hess map that I had in my glove compartment when I went up to visit Ben after agreeing to do the franchise, and that is from Jeff.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that.
And then Sherry asked, when was Palmetto's fruit and vegetable open, since it couldn't compete with Tannenbaum's?
Okay, I know when we first bought the store in 1996, Palmetto's was still open. And see, probably till about 2000. Again, maybe Terry, that's an area where I have to look up the actual date that it opened. But it was there for a long time before it became the Children's Museum and other things. So I'm going to have to check on the date, and I'll get that back to you, Sherry.
Well, actually, Sherry, we have a building history on that building. So we can, if we remember, we will let you know, or you're always more than welcome to stop by the office and take a look at the building history Joan Walter did of that building. Well, I just want to say thank you to everyone for coming and the speakers. It was really great to have you. I learned so much. I think, like I said, you brought the neighborhood to life, and it just reiterates that it all goes together. The cultural heritage, the built environment, the stories can be told together, and it's the people that are preserved from these stories that are carried forward. So I don't know if anybody has any more questions, but oh wait, do you want to share, Nicole, or do you want me to read what? Number 2, Ben went to Colgate, where he, like many other young men at the time, an all-male institution, beat a trail to Skidmore. There he met Courtney Reed, who later operated the Montana bookstore with her sister Abigail. Ben's main connection with Saratoga was through Courtney. In 1977, and he and an old friend Jerry came to town with an idea of opening an ice cream store there, possibly another old friend named Vin. So the first store might have been Ben, Jerry, and Vin's, or Three Guys Ice Cream. Ben worked for a day or two for Michael London, who fired him for not following instructions regarding breaking eggs. Jerry mopped the floors at the restaurant on Route 9 near the lake. They didn't get the Broadway lease that they wanted, so they decamped to Burlington. Well, thank you, Jeff, for sharing such a great story. Well, and now I feel compelled to eat Ben and Jerry's ice cream. Even while it's getting cold, I'm thinking like, wow, that article, Craig, made me just want to enjoy more ice cream. And honestly, your description of eating in the summer during the racing season just hit the nail on the head. It made me think back to this last summer. I was like, gosh, all the eating and drinking that happens. But anyway, Amy, thank you for sharing your words, and Carol, and we're just really glad to have everybody here tonight and have all the great support that we've received. So thank you. And Have a good night, everyone. Take care.